Please welcome Development Director for Abused Deaf Women's Advocacy Services, Lori Amalut.
Hello, everyone. I am Laura Amalut, and I work with ADWA's Abused Deaf Women Advocacy Services. It is an honor to be here today and to see all of you beautiful people in the audience. Yes, hi. So I'd like to share some of my background with you. As a deaf person growing up in Belgium, I lacked access to systems that provide communities with information around such impactful topics like domestic violence and sexual assault, mental health information. I can't stress enough the importance of having equal access to information. That information leads to knowledge. And we all know knowledge is power. We're able to empower ourselves. Again, that information is so impactful to all of our lives. Growing up in Belgium, I lived in a home and experienced domestic violence. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who my support system was. I didn't know where to go for resources. I didn't even know if growing up in a domestic violence household was a normal thing or not. The lack of information and resources made leaving that home for my mother and my brother and myself that much harder. The barriers that we faced to get information. How that affected me, my family, and my community. Not having access to communication, not having access to the information that would help us better our lives and to be able to succeed in our dreams was frustrating. I wanted to give back to my community. I wanted to provide healing. I wanted to create a place where we could have these conversations. So I started out by going to the university in Belgium and again experienced frustration. I took 34 hours of classes a week and only 3 of those hours were provided an interpreter to me. So I lacked information to the classroom and the education that I was so desperate to get. I wasn't able to understand my sense of self. I didn't have an identity or somewhere that I belonged. So I look back and I remember a dream that I had when I was 13. I wanted to go to Gallaudet University. It was the only deaf university in the world. So I decided I was going to break down the barriers for myself. So at 18 years old, I moved to a new country. I didn't know American Sign Language, which was the sign language of deaf people here in the United States. I didn't know English. So it was so overwhelming getting to Gallaudet and yet having access, 100% access, 24/7 to the conversations that took place around me. Being able to learn about the history of deaf people was eye-opening for me. Being able to have a place where we were able to talk about domestic violence and what that means in our lives. I can only imagine it must be what many of you experience every day as hearing people. You have access to information all the time. You don't have to be the last person to know. You don't have to miss out on information or have someone tell you, oh, I'll just let you know what people are saying later. Instead, you have direct access to that information and those conversations. During my time at Gallaudet, I learned more about myself, and I realized that people around me were having open conversations about domestic violence and sexual assault, what healthy relationships look like, what red flags you could identify in unhealthy relationships, what green flags look like, setting healthy boundaries. This whole world was opened up to me, and I was able to learn. Because of the access that I had to these conversations, I was able to bring out some of those old wounds, and I was able to find healing. It helped me have an understanding of who I am as a person. While at Gallaudet, I learned about ADWAs. The university helped us realize that as a community, we needed to be accountable. We needed to get involved. We needed to be taught and teach others what healthy relationships look like. And I had never had that up until this point. Not in Belgium. I was constantly blocked from access to this fantastic information that I was able to get at Gallaudet. AdWaz has such a great impact to the community. They educate, they provide the tools and resources that our community needs in their language. We have that parity. We're able to have those conversations. We're able to grow and empower each other. We're able to encourage each other to make our own decisions. Fast forward a couple years later, and now I'm the development director at AdWaz. Being able to make that move and be here is such an honor. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Knowledge is power. The access to knowledge is allowing me to empower myself. It allows people to empower themselves so that they can succeed. And really that means that we have to work together as one community. Realizing that we can empower a person by giving them the information and the resources they need to change their own decisions and change things in their own favor. Working for an organization such as AdWaz has helped me work with survivors every day by providing support and access to these resources and tools, by breaking down barriers, by teaching others to empower themselves and to make their own decisions. So with that note, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, my mentor, and a person that keeps inspiring me and the community every day, Marilyn J. Smith, the founder of AdWaz.
Please welcome founder and former executive director of Abused Deaf Women's Advocacy Services, Marilyn Smith.
Hello. Before I start, I just want to make sure that all of the deaf people in the audience are able to see me well. And as you may have noticed, my disembodied voice is off to the side here, but please don't look at the voice, look at me. She's also about 33 years younger than I am, so she's making me sound real young tonight, right? Well, I'm so thrilled to be here tonight. People often ask me to talk about the AdWaz story. It always takes me a couple of days to recover afterwards. The origin story of AdWaz is traumatic, and it's difficult to process every time. So I'm feeling a little bit old tonight, so let me think back here. It was about 50 years ago, in November, I was raped by a stranger while I was in college. And that experience changed my life forever. It stole my innocence. My ability to just be light in the world was gone. My ability to access the system was really null. There were no services for anybody back then. For survivors of violence, whether they were hearing or deaf, there was really nothing. I felt like I was raped over and over and over again by the system, and that tension, that anger continued to build, although I tried to maintain a normal life from there. Until the early 1980s, there were services at that point for people who were hearing. There were shelters, there were rape centers, there were a variety of different support services. But at that time, what happened here in our Seattle community, there was a deaf woman who was murdered by her husband who was also deaf. And she was not able to access services because none of the services provided communication access. There were no interpreters that she was able to access, and ended up that her murder prompted the anger that I'd been holding on to for so many years to reemerge. And I realized at that point that no one else was going to take care of our community, that it was really up to us. And I thought, gosh, what are we waiting for? So I met a woman named Ginny Ninkarthi, and she became my mentor. She's a very well-known name here in our community, and she mentored me for, about 3 years. We would go for coffee. She didn't charge me a penny. Volunteers would come and interpreters would come and volunteer their time. But what she kept saying over and over again was, Marilyn, do the work. Just go do it. And then finally in 1986, I realized it was time. So I quit my job. Thank God I had a partner who was able to financially support us. And I was able to call a group of supportive deaf women and hearing allies to be able to found a program here in Seattle. And it was difficult, yes, but at that time as we were coming together, we thought, why not? Let's just do it. So in March of 1986, after lots of discussion, we founded ADWAS. And I remember meeting a few directors of different programs out in the community from hearing organizations and trying to glean a little bit of their wisdom over time. And there was one woman who said, Marilyn, do you know what you're doing? I thought, gosh, yes, I know what I'm doing. Of course, it's not a big deal. It'll be fine. But wow. Founding a nonprofit is a very complicated process, but the passion and the fire was there, and that helped me drive through the complexities of navigating the system. I realized that it was just something that I had to do. It didn't matter. We had an office in my basement. There was no funding. For several years, we were just very scrappy, but it didn't matter. We thought, we are identifying our community needs and figuring out how they're different for the deaf community than they are in the hearing community. So we started with a very small crew, but over time, we grew larger and larger and larger. And during the early years, I should say that the deaf community was really not supportive of the founding of our agency. It was in conflict, in a way, with deaf community values. There are community values that aren't always positive, regardless of how treasured they might be. So we came head to head with the concept that within the community, private things should stay private. But we thought that it was time to be able to come and face that head on. So we realized that we might not have community support those first few years, but we persisted. Over time, as we developed, there were seeds that were planted, and it seemed to change people's way of thinking. Over time, there was a shift. Things changed, and I realized, I'm sorry, I'm jumping back and forth a little bit in time, but from day one, we knew that it was important that our organization be deaf-centered and women-centered. So back in 1986, we already knew that that was critical. We knew it was important that we have direct language access. We didn't need to use interpreters. We could communicate directly with each other. We knew that it was important that we really thoughtfully invested in figuring out ways to build healthy relationships and healthy boundaries. So we knew what our priorities were. And Seattle was, and still is, really a very healthy city when you think about it. Back then, many cities and states didn't believe that deaf people were able to stand alone, to be able to independently run businesses and organizations. So we really had to fight against a lot of what was happening around the country in other deaf communities, but luckily here in Seattle, we didn't have to face a lot of that. Here, there were segments, right? There were services within the Black community, within the Asian community, and for us, we then were able to serve the deaf community. So through that, we became pioneers in a way. Excuse me while I reference my notes. I have 1 minute and 13 seconds left. Oh gosh. So, let me think. By 1998, we were about 13 years old. The US Department of Justice gave us a huge grant to be able to train different deaf communities around the country to be able to replicate our model. It was very successful at that point. Thank you. We were not gonna administer these programs. We were just there to provide information and support for them to be able to create their own standalone programs. It was so important to me at that moment to see. It was pretty easy, right, to go out and fly and train them and then come back, but we didn't want to leave them with nothing. We wanted to make sure that they had a foundation. I'm going to have to jump ahead a little bit in time. In 2006, we actually opened up the first transitional housing program in all of America. It just really came full circle. At this point now, I'm retired. I retired in 2011 when ADWAS had the 25-year anniversary, and we had to realize that executive directors do not stay forever. But I watch now, and I look and I see that they're still growing, and it's such an honor to see the work that people are doing around the country, this bold work that's happening everywhere. And a lot of those people are here today, so I want to thank them, and I thank you.